Hello, I'm Anthony Ciliberto. I'm going to be examining Baloo from the Jungle Book. I'm going to start with the directional terms. So I'm going to start with right and left, and what's obviously the right side of the body and the left side of the body, and that's from the perspective of the patient, Baloo, not from the perspective of the video. For example, this would be his right hand, and this would be like his left leg. Like his hand is more right than the shoulder, his leg, his foot is more left here than his thigh. And we superior, which is towards the head. His nose is superior from his mouth, and inferior, which is away from the head. Like his stomach would be inferior from his neck up here, and so anterior is towards the front of the body. So his stomach would be anterior from his back over here. This is the front. And posterior is towards the back of the body. So his ears are more posterior than his nose. There's medial, which is towards the midline of the body, so right here, straight down the middle. So his mouth would be more medial than his ears out here. And there's lateral, which is away from the midline of the body. So his arms out here would be more lateral than, say, his sternum, which is towards the middle of his body. And there's proximal, which is towards the limb attachment point. So basically, for example, his shoulders right here would be more proximal than his hands to the attachment point, which would be like these right here. And then there's distal, which is away from the attachment point. So his toes here would be more distal than his ankle up here to the attachment point around here. We have superficial, which is towards the surface of the body. So his skin will be superficial towards his heart, since it's inside of his body, as the skin is the outer layer. And then there's deep, which is away from the surface of the body. His brain inside his skull would be deep compared to his nose out here on the surface. Now we have the skeleton of Baloo, which is separated into two parts, axial and appendicular. I'm going to start with axial, and that contains the bones of the head, neck, and trunk, specifically the skull, the bones in the neck, rib cage, and spinal cord. And every other bone in the body is part of the appendicular skeleton, which is, all the limbs, all the bones in the limbs, the pelvis, and the collarbone, and others are part of the appendicular system. All right, so now I'm gonna explain the body cavities of Baloo. So basically, a body cavity is like a fluid-filled space in the body that holds and protects internal organs. So basically, the cavities are first separated into two sections, dorsal and ventral. I'm gonna start with dorsal first because that's only separated into two other subcategories. Dorsal cavities are defined as cavities that protect the nervous system of the body, and separated into cranial and spinal cavities. So the cranial cavity is in the head. It's the cavity within the skull that protects the brain. And then there's a spinal cavity, which runs down and encases the spinal cord of the body. So the ventral cavities are basically defined as being anterior from the dorsal cavities, which is just basically, they would just be in the front of the body since dorsal's in the back. So that's separated into the thoracic cavity and the abdominopelvic cavity. The thoracic cavity is up in the upper chest area of the body. That contains the heart and the lungs, stuff like that. And inferior to that is the abdominopelvic cavity. It spans from below the thoracic cavity down to the bottom of the torso of the body. And that contains stuff like the stomach, liver, spleen, intestines of the body, and the rectum and the reproductive organs of the body. So I'm going to talk about the planes. I'm going to start with the sagittal plane. That is any plane that is vertical going straight down the body, that separates it into right and left sections. They do not have to be equal. The line can be anywhere on the body as long as it's just vertical going straight down, separating it into right and left. But now, a mid-sagittal plane is specifically a sagittal plane that is down the midline of the body. So it has to be straight down the middle for it to be considered mid-sagittal. And then, so there's the frontal plane. So it'd be down the kind of the middle of his side to separate it into the anterior side and the posterior side. And then there's the transverse plane. So that would kind of be, it would be going through horizontally the side down here, and that would separate it, separate the body into superior part and the inferior part, like kind of, yeah, right there. All right, so back to the abdominopelvic region. That can actually be separated into 4 quadrants. So you got the right upper quadrant, the left upper quadrant, the right lower quadrant, and then the left lower quadrant. So the abdominopelvic region can be further separated into 9 regions with like a kind of like a tic-tac-toe shape. In the top right, you have the right hypochondriac region. In the middle, the epigastric, and then the left hypochondriac region. Then for the middle row, it's the right lumbar region, the umbilical region, then the left lumbar region. And then the bottom right, you have the right iliac region, the hypogastric region, and the left iliac region.